look, I did something stupid, but that's okay. It was a learning experience. I took 7 vintage Pokemon Beckett slabs, cracked those, and sent them to PSA. I then cracked them again and sent them to CGC. Spoiler alert, they change grades each time. I know this is a small sample size, but there are some really crazy results you won't believe. And for each card, we'll assign points to each grading company, 1 point for being the most strict and 1 point for being the least strict. We'll tally them up at the end to see who came out on top. All right, let's dive in. Okay, first up is Magneton base set from 1999. I got this card in a Beckett 9.5 with okay subgrades. I got it for $140. I cracked it, I sent it to PSA, and it got an 8. Okay, that's quite a big jump. So let's see what happened with CGC. It got a 9, which is honestly a little bit surprising. I thought CGC would be the most lenient of the 3. The value went from 140 to 50 to 70, so not good. We're gonna give 1 point to PSA for most strict and 1 point for Beckett for least strict after this card. Next up is Ampharos first edition Neo Genesis. I also got this card in a Beckett 9.5. I wasn't expecting a 10 when I sent the PSA, but when I cracked it, it came back a 7. Okay, that's terrible. Let's see what happens when I send it to CGC. It came back an 8. Okay, so that's even more surprising because that's basically a Beckett 9.5 to a CGC 8. So I'm thinking, okay, CGC is actually pretty strict. The value went from 190 to 60 to 50 here. So yeah, not great. Another point for Beckett being the least strict and 1 more point for PSA being the most strict. Here we have Pichu Neo Genesis first edition. I got this in a Beckett 8.5. The centering isn't great. I didn't expect much for PSA. I was hoping for an 8 or something. It got a 6, so that's yet another card where PSA is more strict. And CGC gave it a 7. Okay, so far every time CGC has been 1 grade above PSA, but less than Beckett. Also, may I say this card is beautiful. I love it. I love the Neo Genesis set. It's just a great set. 1 more point to PSA for most strict and 1 more point for Beckett being the least strict. Surprising results so far, to be honest. We have Meganium first edition from the same set. So I cracked this one out of a Beckett 8.5. I noticed I got an 8.5 centering, and just right away I kind of thought that was low for just looking at it. It looks like pretty well centered. I got to crack it and send it to PSA. PSA gave it an 8. It's a CGC 9, which is now the highest grade that this card has been in. That's 1 point, first point for CGC being least strict, but yet again, another point to PSA being the most strict. Perhaps the biggest swing out of all these cards is this next one. We have Wailord EX Sandstorm from 2003. I bought it in a Beckett 9.5, around $200. And then PSA is like, you know what? That's not a 9.5, that's an 8. Oh, cool. Thanks, PSA. How lovely of you. So I sent to CGC, and CGC gave it a 10, which is awesome. It jumped up 2 grades from PSA, which is kind of crazy. So it went from 200 to 90 to about 400. So we're going to give 1 point to CGC for least strict and another point to PSA for being most strict. Wow, PSA is extremely strict on vintage. Okay, next up in this little experiment is Slowking first edition Neo Genesis. Okay, this one I cracked out of a Beckett 9. It looked pretty clean. It had a tiny bit of edge wear, but I'm like, you know what? Let's just send it to PSA. And it got an 8. Of course it did. Every single time PSA without fail has been lower than Beckett. Somewhat unexpected to me. I knew they were strict, but not this strict. So I sent it to CGC, and CGC gave it a 9, which, okay, that's to be expected. Right on par with Beckett. Went from 350 to 150, back to around 350, so can't really complain. Definitely worth the experiment. Also, one thing that I want to point out is that if you check the scan on the website, it's just completely blank. So CGC, what's going on here? This is happening for all these cards in this submission. I have no idea. Just thought it was interesting. We're going to give no points to least strict this round. I'm going to give 1 more point to PSA for most strict. Once again, last up in this little experiment is Scyther Japanese Jungle Hollow. I think this card is awesome. Scyther's so cool. I do like the Japanese cards. I cracked it out of a Beckett 9.5. I got it for around 50 bucks. I apologize. I didn't get a good picture of the Beckett slab, so you're going to get this 20 by 20 resolution pixel image. I'm so sorry, but that's what it was in a Beckett. PSA gave it a 9. Okay, that's fine. 9.5 to 9. That's fine. I understand. Sent it to CGC. CGC gave it a 10, which is awesome. And honestly, I think it's well deserved. I mean, I'm not a professional grader, but it looks clean. It looks wonderful. Yet again, that's another point for PSA being most strict, but CGC gets a point for being least strict. Okay, so the final results. We're going to go over the value of all 7 slabs for Beckett, then PSA, then CGC. Okay, so for Beckett, the value of all the slabs is about $1,200. Once we set them off to PSA, the value of all the slabs dropped down to $600, which is half the original value, which is not looking good. CGC gave him a little bit more, almost $1,300, which is pretty decent. So it looks like Beckett and CGC evaluate your vintage cards around the same. But PSA is extremely strict. My advice is, if you have a vintage cards that look to be in good condition, I say send them to CGC. I like the look of the slabs. I know some people don't. I think they look great. I like seeing a big number of my grade on my slabs rather than PSA. I need like a little magnifying glass to even see what the heck I'm looking at because the numbers are so small. And for those of you that care about how I personally did with this, it cost me about $1,300 for all these cards and the grading. That total value was also almost $1,300, so I lost about $60 throughout this whole experiment, which honestly isn't that bad. I'll spend $60 just to learn this information. In a video coming up soon, I'll be cracking 20 vintage Pokemon PSA slabs and sending them to CGC just to see what happens. So stay tuned for that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very interesting. All right, that's all I got for now. Bye.